So I'd like to begin with acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today, wherever we are around the country and in your country. So if you know the country that you're coming from today, please put it in the chat. But I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people of Brisbane and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of teaching, learning and research. Welcome everybody. It is so good to have you. If this is your first time at Tea and Buns, please put a 2 in the chat because I've already used 1. So let's use a 2. If this is your first time, awesome. Okay. Well, let me just give you a 10 seconds. What is Tea and Buns all about for those people who are joining us for the very first time? Tea and Buns is a community of practice that we started 2 years ago now. And 2 years ago, it was a way for me to get to know people in the sector and really for us to talk about topical issues, things, challenges that we're facing, leadership issues. Throughout last year, we talked a lot about issues to do with COVID and resilience and leadership. So it really is a real mix of topics that we talk about every month. It's a free community of practice, and it is really just so that anybody can come along and chat with someone from the sector who has been doing some research in this area or is an expert in this area that we just want to pick their brains. And we have had some amazing Tea and Buns over the last 2 years. We always record them so that we can put them up for anybody to watch after if they're not able to make the live session. So we will be recording today, just so that you know that. But that's what Tea and Buns is all about. And why is it called Tea and Buns? I hope you have your cup of tea or your coffee, your morning coffee, if that's the time of day for you. It's called Tea and Buns because it's a line from Wind in the Willows. And in the book, we were invited to come and have tea and buns to make the world a better place. So I reckon that's what we're going to be doing today. So we're using a webinar format today, which just means that you can use the Q&A. You should see a Q&A section to ask any questions. And we're going to keep an eye on that to see if there's any questions that you would specifically like to ask Lewe or get his insights. But you can also ask anybody on chat as well about what their experiences are. I know that some of you are already in this space and already doing systems thinking and systems evaluation, and there's others who are brand new to this and have come really to find out what this is all about. So this is a community. We want to share your ideas, share your insights, your experiences. So please use the chat, and I think most people have found the chat now. So that's great and fantastic. And I'll try and keep an eye on the chat for questions, but if I may miss that. So if it's a real question that you want to ask, please put it in the Q&A section. All right, let's get going. I think it's a good time to get going. So today we're going to be talking about systems thinking and using systems thinking when we're evaluating. And I thought that we'd just kick off with a great question that I've learned over the last few months. I've really been doing a lot of I've been doing a lot of review on this topic myself, and I have found that systems thinkers, and Lewe has tried to agree, well, he's approved this as a question, a really good question that systems thinkers ask themselves and their teams and their stakeholders. Why is it that despite our best efforts, we have been unable to solve this? All right. Now, while I just explain this, I want you to think about what is your this, okay? What would you put there? All right. And if you want to share it, we'd really love to know. But it's a really good question because it allows us to really be curious about systems and why complex problems happen and why there are challenges within our organization or within the community or wherever you're working. And it's just such a great question that allows us to start to think about the various aspects of wicked problems and why those problems are occurring. Now, if you want to, and if you haven't yet listened to Tom Wujek's TED Talk that he gave a few years ago, but it's a fantastic TED Talk. And I think I'm actually going to ask Leanne and Jill to put in the link, not to watch now, but please watch it later. Okay, Tom Wujek talks about understanding why you burnt the toast. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good example because I burn the toast all the time. I have a pretty dodgy toaster, and I sometimes burn the toast, and my kids ask me, Mom, the toast is burnt again. Why have you burnt the toast? Now, you might go, what has that got to do with systems thinking? But Tom Wujek really explains in his TED Talk that that's a real good example of thinking about the various reasons why you might have burnt the toast. So I'm going to throw it out to you folks and put in the chat. Why do you think I burnt the toast? Go for it. Let's see what you think. Got distracted, the settings were wrong. Yeah, like that. Too high temperature, inattention. Look, so many of you know me. I got distracted, yes. Dodgy toaster, that's right. Juggling too many things. Life is busy, Nina. You're absolutely right. The bread wasn't right. Actually, raisin bread takes less time than normal bread. I've worked that out. I have to change the settings depending on what bread I'm. The kids did it, yeah, maybe. I'm loving that. I'm loving all your ideas, and you're actually really sort of explaining then why this is such a great question to ask, because there are so many reasons why I might have burnt the toast. And we're going to talk about this now, because that's really the beginning of systems thinking, is thinking about the myriad of reasons why this problem has occurred or how I could do better next time, right? Because sometimes I get it right, and I'd like to kind of learn what the aspects are. So I might have to do, many of you, I'm going to laugh like, yes, relied on someone else to check the toast, Rachel. Yes, I do that. I walk off and forget that I've got the toaster. So was that helpful? That was just a quick sort of introduction to the way that you can think about systems thinking when you go back after this tea and buns back to your team, and just try to start getting them to think about systems thinking. All right, great. So, Lewe. Let me introduce Lewe, because Lewe's going to tell me are you going to tell me why I really burnt the toast, Lewe? No, you're not. You don't have to. But I really want to just introduce Lewe, and thank you for coming along today, Lewe. You're a consultant in this area. You're a researcher. You have done a lot of work on systems thinking and systems evaluation, but using systems thinking in strategic planning. I know you use it a lot throughout your work. So welcome today. Do you want to just give us a little introduction? Why do you love systems thinking? How has it become so part of everything that you do?
Thanks, Ruth. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners as well. And it was my birthday yesterday, and my daughter bought me an outfit, which I'll just proudly display here.
Love it.
And I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations artist, Judy Napagadi Watson, who created this little piece of art that I'm wearing today. And it's called Mina Mina Dreaming, and it's based on a drag dotting style of art. And I'd also like to thank you for inviting me to tea and buns. I had hot cross buns for breakfast this morning, so I feel well prepared for our conversation. But I really like the premise upon which you've based this community of practice, because I really like that saying that you share with us. We'll see if tea and buns can make the world a better place. And I think we're all contributing in our own way to trying to make where we are and who we live with better for everyone. And I feel that systems thinking can make a really important contribution to that. It's not the only way of doing or being whatever, but I've had a career now spanning more than 35 years in a professional sense, and I've experienced an awakening, I suppose, to what I call my systems thinking superpowers. And that doesn't mean they're peculiar to me. I think they're latent. If you haven't discovered them already, they're there inside you. It's just a matter of us opening the door, people like us, opening the door for people like you out there to feel confident enough to step through it and start to feel and learn this new or potentially new way of looking at things, and then starting to yield the dividends from that. And for me personally, in my practice, the 4 things that I think really stick out for me with regard to the way systems thinking enhances the way I work is I see systems now, so I can see them, I understand what they are, and I can also see the parts within them that interact to create what the system is. Seeing that big picture as well is really important. Also seeing situations through the eyes of others, experiences, viewpoints, and also seeing how understanding mental models that other people are using to process what's around them helps me understand the system structure that they're part of. And so it certainly enriches my capacity, I feel, to make a value-added contribution to things that we're working on together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I also am getting to absolutely love this, concept of systems thinking, because it is very inclusive.
Yes.
And it is very much about listening to people's voices and perspectives and ideas. We've all heard everybody's ideas about why I burnt the toast today. And I love that, because everybody's contributing to this idea of like, why is this challenge happening? Or how could we solve that? Or how could we do better? So Lewe, you have been part of my journey. I came to a wonderful session with yourself and Ralph Rengar, where I learned a lot about how you've been using systems thinking in evaluations. And this is why I sort of tapped you on the shoulder and said, please come and talk to Tea and Buns group, the community, and tell us a little bit more about what we can learn from you. So the first thing I want to do then is throw it back to everybody online today and say, what did you put in the word this? What was the word that you felt for you was there? Let's just get a sense of where everybody's from today. So it's, why is it that despite our best efforts, we have been unable to solve what put it in the chat for me so we can see where you're from and what you're thinking. Great, love that. Really important questions, love it. Excellent. Oh, reconciliation. Awesome. Regional disadvantage. Yeah, love it. Farm animal welfare. Yeah, great. Isn't this amazing? Everybody has been able to put something in this. Why is it that we, can't solve this or can't do better with this? And I'm loving to see where you're from. And so, Lewe, I really want to just get the basics first. I want you to just tell us, then we've got our question, why is it that we can't solve this? Or why is it that we need to do better at this? So if we're starting from a systems thinking perspective, what's the basics that we need to now know if we're going to start looking at some of these issues? Can you tell us, just make sure that we're all understanding what a system is and how we might start using that thinking?
Well, no problems, Ruth. I'm happy to do that. And I just want to emphasize that no one person owns systems thinking. It's a community property where we're all part of this systems thinking community if we choose to join it. And that emphasizes that notion of inclusion, Ruth. We want more people to be thinking about thinking. And so to that end, I'll use the American Evaluation Association definition of what a system is. And for those of you who are evaluators out there or who know who the American Evaluation Association is, which is obviously the US Evaluation Professional Association, they have a special interest group that focuses on effective use of systems thinking in evaluation. So there's a really nice paper that you can download from their website. And their definition is a system is a set of interrelated, very important word, interrelated elements that interact, another very important word, to achieve an inherent or ascribed purpose. So if you think about your toaster example, that if you draw the boundary around the toaster itself, that's a system. And the ascribed purpose that that system's trying to achieve is a perfectly cooked piece of toast. Now, the perception of that depends on the perception of the individual who wants to eat that bit of toast, because one person's uncooked piece of toast might be an overcooked for someone else. So that's really important to understand. Perspectives are so crucial to what success looks like for a system. However, all those parts of the toaster process, the timing, the structure, the mechanisms, the dial that sets the timer, all that sort of stuff come together to create this emergent property, which is the cooked piece of toast. Now, none of the individual parts can create a cooked piece of toast by itself, but together they come together to create that emergent property, which is the cooked piece of toast. So that's what system and systems boundaries are used to describe what a system is. And when we're thinking about, all right, let's analyze this system, we often ask ourselves two preconditioning questions. So what system are we looking at? So what's the entity, what's the level of the system that we're wanting to evaluate? So that starts to talk about this idea of drawing boundaries, a really important systems principle that I'll pick up again later. And then there's this notion of nestedness. So there are systems that nest inside systems that nest inside systems, and they're all interrelated. Remember what I said earlier about that interrelated elements is a really important concept too. So within that system that we've set the boundary for, what levels are we working at within that system that we're trying to change? And so defining the system is really important, first step. And then second, within that system, what level are we trying to intervene or change at? So they're two really crucial concepts in systems thinking.
Yeah, you're explaining some really important words, which I've been sort of wrestling with and getting to know over the last few months. And I want to really put it out to the group today that if you've now got what you put in the chat about what you did this, like write that down in the circle of a piece of paper, and then like a bit of like a mind map or even a couple of circles, try and think about, well, who is within that system? So Melinda, for instance, has put domestic and family violence. So if you put that in the middle of your paper and then you sort of did a bit of a mind map about, well, who is in that system? Who has some interest or some influence over that problem? I reckon you're going to start doing a bit of a big brainstorm, okay, about sort of people who are directly trying to affect or influence that problem, or people who are maybe on the fringes, might be outside of your boundaries that you don't work with, or that's not who you're working with, but they still might have some influence on that problem. Is that a good thing to do, Lewe? I'm trying to get them to understand, you know, what you're talking about here in terms of boundaries and the systems that they're working in.
Of course, Ruth, and my systems thinking journey began before I knew that I was doing anything to do with systems thinking, right? One of my favorite things I remember in my 20s when I was working factories and stuff, and the thing I'd like to do if I had a problem, I'd get a big A3 sheet of paper and just start drawing how things were connected up. And you're already systems thinking without knowing your systems thinking. And as your capacity to gain insight from that expands, then the whole thing starts to generate more value for you. And also it's a powerful way to communicate to others. That's the other thing I like about systems thinking. If you can grip onto some of those key principles, they're relatable to other people, and people can start to understand where they fit in that picture that you're drawing. And this notion of interconnectedness is a really powerful notion. And famous early systems thinker is a fellow called Churchman. And his quote I really like, and it sort of comes back to that notion of participative co-design that's really inherent in good systems thinking. He says the systems approach begins when first you see the world through the eyes of another. And he said that's the first stepping stone of systems thinking, is looking through the eyes of other stakeholders. I think that's really important insight.
And very powerful, actually, which sometimes we can forget to do sometimes in our urgency to try and get on with our work. So maybe here's another, I'm trying to think about what else you can do now as you're writing down these ideas. Maybe write down, whose eyes do I need to look at this problem through? And again, you may already be doing this in your work, but if you actually write it down and say, well, okay, I'm going to go back to Melinda's domestic and family violence. Who does Melinda, perhaps we can help Melinda in her brainstorm. Who do we need to think about looking through their eyes in that issue there? Because it's not just ours, as Lewe was saying. We're pretty good at looking through our eyes, and we know our work and what we're doing. But when we take this systems view, we start to look at other people's. Anybody got ideas for Melinda? Whose eyes or whose perspective do we need to gather and gain to understand why is this wicked problem still going on? Okay, all right. I'm throwing some ideas out to the group here. I suppose, Lewe, this is all really very fascinating and interesting. And as you say, some people are probably already doing it without realizing the principles behind it. So how and why is it powerful when we do evaluations? Because many people want to know, how well are we doing our work? Are our programs working? Are our, whatever we're doing day to day, is it making a difference? Are we somehow contributing towards this problem in a positive way? So why should we use systems thinking in evaluation?
Well, just to pick up on the concept that you just encourage us to think about, through whose eyes are we looking at this problem? And that sort of works back to this whole notion that evaluators are really sort of founded upon, which is developing a criteria of merit for what good looks like. If you're trying to evaluate a program or a process or a system, you're trying to hold it up against what criteria we need to assess it against to be able to determine whether it's good and whether it passes a hard bar, a minimum standard. So how can we assess that? And whose criteria are they? And often the great challenge for evaluators is to ensure that the criteria they develop for that assessment are not just those who are commissioning the evaluator to do the evaluation, but also particularly I'm seeing this being really crucial in the eyes of philanthropists. They want to solve problems at a systems level. So what are the criteria of merit for effectively improving a system? Which of course, if you take the definition of a system and it's got a boundary and there's parts within the boundary, the criteria of merit for goodness must incorporate the perspectives of all of those within. And that's a major challenge, but you can never get there until you recognize who's in there in the first place. So I think that's a really important element of systems thinking and how it contributes to more effective evaluation at a systems level.
Yeah. Totally get that. And that concept of really then a lot deeper, I suppose, and more comprehensive conversations with people who are commissioning or doing evaluation, even if it's your own, even if it's yourself. So, Lewe, what are the principles? Give everybody just some sense, please, about, you know, if we're heading into this direction, we want to do our evaluations much better, more comprehensive, more inclusive. We really want to understand the contribution that we're making to these wicked problems. You know, what are some of the principles from you're a systems thinker, you know, what would you say are some key things for us to take away from this conversation today?
Thanks, Ruth. I'll take us back to that definition that I shared earlier, a set of interrelated elements that interact to achieve an inherent or ascribed purpose. So that purpose is the emergent property of those interactions of those parts, right? And coming back to what's the criteria of merit, of goodness, how do I judge goodness? It's about how well does that sort of emergent property being achieved, okay? So when we first are given the task to explore evaluating a system, we get up in the helicopter, get that sort of first step is to work on the system. So recognizing that even us being part conducting an evaluation will influence the system itself. Yeah. We've got to be able to clearly define that boundary and understand what's in, what's out. Now, to an extent, it's arbitrary, and there's a lots of aspects of defining the boundary. But in the end, it's really the stakeholders who are engaged or part of that system and what are their common goals for being part of that system in the first place. Then we go inside and explore the interactions, how the parts interacting. They'll all be doing their own things, but also those things that they're doing is going to be influencing or interacting with what the other parts are trying to achieve, and then getting back up in the helicopter above the system and then trying to figure out that criteria of merit. What would good look like if this system was operating well to achieve that desired outcome or that emergent property that everyone's striving for. So just coming now to those principles, there's actually 5 principles that the American Evaluation Association define in the practice of evaluating systems. Is that notion of interrelationship. So that focuses on the parts of the system, within the system, the elements and how they work together, how they could work best together to achieve that emergent property or that common goal. That's the interrelationships principle. The boundaries principle is really important, and recognizing there's also hierarchy of nested systems within that outside boundary. It's important because it defines the scope of the evaluation. The next principle is the dynamics principle. So this is the third principle. Reminds evaluators of the need to integrate flexibility into the evaluation plan itself that anticipates and captures the way the system changes and in its behavior over time. And finally, the good old multiple perspectives principle. We've touched on that a number of times already. They're needed from a systems actor's perspective to establish the boundaries in the first place and accurately capture the interrelationships and dynamics between them. So those 5 principles, interrelationships, boundaries, dynamics, multiple perspectives, are all really important in terms of being able to conduct an effective evaluation of a system.
So Monica asked what was 4. I think it was dynamics, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did you just say yes, dynamics? Now, everybody put a 1 in the chat if this is really interesting to you, right? Are you getting some of these? Are you getting some of this concept? All right, okay. We've got lots of 1s. Everybody's following along. Fantastic. Okay, because this is a lot of jargon if you don't know these words, but it's also really interesting if you're going, wow, you know, this is why systems thinking is so important. Now,
and these principles are available, downloadable from the AEA website. Just go there, look for systems thinking principles. for evaluation.
And Monica, we will maybe put that link up for you, okay? Now, the other really great thing, Lewe, about this is it's a very continuous learning, continuous improvement approach, isn't it? When we've got all these ideas, perspectives, and I know that you shared a really huge diagram with me, and I do think we need to show this, if you don't mind. Would you mind if I showed this? Oh, let's just, can I bring it all up?
Yeah, bring it all up.
Bring it all up. Oops.
Go back one.
Okay. Now, can you just explain then, because some people understand, you know, logic models or theories of change, and this is quite a complex diagram, but I really just give us the high level explanation about what this is all about and why systems thinking is so great for learning organisations, which I think we all aspire to be.
Indeed. And what I might suggest, Ruth, is we go, there's 2 or 3 slides on, and it's applied the same 3 loops to a program logic diagram that people might be more familiar with. So just,
you want me to go on?
Yes. Go to next one. There. Now click through the animation.
Okay.
Right. So everyone would be familiar with that sort of program logic framework. If you're an evaluator, you've got inputs, process, outputs, outcomes, etc., etc., etc. So it's evaluation 101. I just wanted to overlay this notion of nested learning loops, which I think is a really important systems thinking concept. Now, other people would use another theory to describe this, which I'm totally fine, is adaptive management, the what, so what, now what concept. Exactly the same sort of thinking, but I just think this triple loop learning sort of applies nicely to this program logic model. So inputs to outputs, okay? And then that feedback loop, you can see single loop learning, top left-hand corner. That's, are we doing what we said we do right? So are we efficiently converting our inputs using our process to those outputs? Are we doing it right? You know, is there rework, too much rework, or we're doing it wrong, or we're, you know, our process is defective in some sort of way. So that's single loop learning, is just getting that basics right. And you can see how I've defined the system boundary there around that input, process, output. But recognizing too that that system is nesting inside a broader system that's got its own boundary outside that. So the inputs feeding into that system, the program and service directives, and also the outcomes being achieved at the other side, are serving another higher systems level. And so that brings in double loop learning, or the second level of nested thinking, which is the bottom left-hand corner. When we're looking about the effectiveness of converting those inputs through our process to achieve our outputs and then subsequent outcomes, are we doing the right things to achieve those outcomes? Because there could be a whole bunch of different ways to use those inputs to achieve that outcome. So is the process part in the middle working the right way to ensure that we achieve those outcomes? And then you zero out the next level, the triple loop learning feedback that picks up the final outcomes loop back to program service objectives, and that then feedback through again. And that triple loop, or that outside loop, is often in not-for-profit land, we talk about mission drift, and mission fit. Okay, and this is where the strategic planning stuff really starts to bite, I think, in terms of sort of making leadership teams and also boards reflect on. We've been doing it this way for so long. However, maybe working in the system that we're part of and we're trying to change, but we're keeping on doing what we've been doing all along, and it's not changing. So maybe we have to sit back and reflect, hey, at a triple loop learning level, is this right outcome for us? Or could we be repositioning ourselves and adapting our mission to be a better fit to serve that broader system, emergent property.
Yeah.
So there are layers. You can be doing you can be doing things right, but they could be the completely wrong things to serve the purpose of the system that you're working within. So that's really the notion of that.
Yeah, and Louis, I like this because you do not need to be a leader, even an evaluator. You do not need to have a title to do this stuff. You can be a frontline worker. You can be someone in your organization who isn't frontline. This is really for everybody, isn't it? Because once you start thinking about, well, what am I doing in my work? What outcomes or outputs am I having, and sort of what is achieving my goals, or what is, barriers to me achieving my goals. Once we start all thinking like this, it can really produce some rich conversations in our organizations, but also with our beneficiaries, the people that we're working with and we're trying to help create change for, or working with them to create change. So I think this is conceptually, it's something we've got to get our heads around. But once we start doing it, it's a really exciting way of changing our culture, because this is very cultural. This is about changing our culture from a blame culture and always thinking about the problems to really now thinking about opportunities and thinking, wow, how could we do that different? And why did I burn that toast? What else could I do to really make sure that I can do better with my work or for my beneficiaries? Does that make sense, everybody? I've got no questions in the Q&A yet, but I want you all to feel free. You can put some questions in there.
And I just want to pick up on this idea of none of this being new, really. There's a lot of this, what we've got on the slide is we're integrating other thinking from other, if you like, genres or fields or whatever into this evaluation frame to clarify what level we're working at. And the important thing here is you should be able to start to see this idea of nesting inside systems, nesting inside systems, and how important the interaction between levels is, and also how important it is having clarity of purpose and mission, and then cascading that back down to the level of service delivery is in terms of being able to achieve a systems level outcome that everyone's striving for. So in essence, what I'm saying, if you want the system that you're working within to change, you have to change what you're doing in that system. And so does everyone else who are working in that same system. Now, that rolls off the tongue pretty easy, but it's not easy to achieve. But unless people start to conceive the way they work in this sort of way, they won't be able to grapple with what needs to change to improve the outcome. And we're stealing things from Drucker in this slide, and this is a wonderful book for anyone who is interested. The Drucker, The Effective Executive, you can find it at any secondhand bookstore. The other new stuff that I've been reading is the Buddhist and Taoist systems thinking. Now, this triple loop learning stuff is at the heart of Buddhist and Taoist thinking. I mean, and this goes back literally millennia. And so all of this sort of way of being and way of looking at the world is not something we've invented in the last 50 years. It's something that's been there for a long time. And indeed, our First Nations people have been thinking this way, and the way they interact and the way they tell stories for 60,000 years here in Australia. And so we're just getting it, I think, and great. The sooner we get it, I think, the world may be a better place.
So I'm going to pick up on the most challenging thing you just said then, is that we have to think about ourselves and reflect on ourselves and how we do things and why we do things and why we perhaps say things and why we, it's a very reflective process, isn't it? When we start to go, am I part of the problem or am I part of the solution? And I really think that's a big challenge for people, because it's hard. It's just hard to go, you know, what am I doing? Where's my role in this issue? And so I wanted to ask you a question, because I'm really aware of the time and we don't have too much time left, Lewe. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about many people know that my background is homelessness and youth work. And so I wanted to just ask you, if my question was, why is it that despite our best efforts, we've been unable to solve youth homelessness? What would be the first thing that you would advise me to do? We've talked about some principles. We've talked about, you know, why it's important to ask this question. Can you just give me, again, where would you send me off? Like, what would you say is the first thing I need to do if I said, you know, this is youth homelessness? What would I need to do?
Well, the first thing I'd do is quote a famous systems thinker called Donella H. Meadows. Many of you may have heard of Donella. And she talks about this leadership role in systems, the dancing with the system. It's about both leading and following. And she said, we can't impose our will on a system, okay? Because it's much bigger than us. We're in it, we're part of it. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover its properties and how our values can work together to bring forth something that's much better than could ever been produced by our will alone. So what Danella's telling us is, if we want to achieve the outcome that you just described, you can't do it alone. It's got to be done with others, okay? And what I then say to you is, well, let's look at the architecture of this system that we're talking about that's currently delivering us the homelessness result that we currently get. Because the other famous quote I want to share with you is from Deming. Edward Deming, when people would be familiar with him from continuous improvement, total quality management back in the 50s. And he said something really powerful, I think. Every system is already perfectly designed to get the results it currently gets. So if you want those results to change, if you want rates of homelessness to decline or incidents of particular disease to change, you've got to change the system, structure, architecture to change the results it gets. So I'd take you to the Iceberg Diagram.
Do you want me to show you that?
And I'd ask you to think about your system from the perspective of the Iceberg Diagram. And the really important thing, there it is there. And while the Iceberg Diagram is used by systems thinkers everywhere in the world. And it's a really powerful tool to deconstruct a system in a way that you can better understand why you're currently getting the results that you're getting. The content, the tip of the iceberg, is those results. Below the surface are the causal relationships that are leading to those results. So if you want to change homelessness from X to Y, you've got to look below the surface and see what processes, what structures, and what culture are enabling that result to happen. And it's big. I'm not saying it's a small picture. This is a big picture. But if you want to start to change a system, you've got to map out the component parts. And one way to do that is using this tool. And a really important thing to remember here is the relationship between these three terms, content, process, and structure, is that content and processes, the stuff above the waterline and just below the waterline, happen within the context of structures. So when people talk about, oh, it's a structural problem, that's what they're talking about. It's the way things are currently arranged in an organizational and or societal context leads to those results. So if you want to start to make meaningful change, you've got to get below the surface and start to adjust or intervene when the system lets you do that, when you understand its pulse, and cycles and make those changes at the right point in time to start to then watch whether the content or the results start to change over time because you've created a new structure. Now, that requires a long time horizon. It won't happen in a short period of time, but at least if you're at the right place at the right time, you can make a meaningful difference if you understand how it all sticks together. And again, you're back to that big piece of paper in front of you and starting to map out your system's architecture in terms of content, process, structure, and culture.
So I think this is a really good question from Jane, which is kind of talking to what you're saying right now, is how important is it to be involved in the process of doing the thinking as a group? So, I mean, obviously we can sit and we can think ourselves, but involving different people's perspectives and getting people to think in a group along these lines, how important is that?
Well, I reckon even though I was dragged kicking and screaming into COVID, I hated the idea of not being in a room with a group of people. That whole not being with others was something I really struggled with, but we were pushed into online land. And we started using platforms like Miro and Mural and those sorts of platforms. And what it actually opened up is a way to, have this sort of massive virtual whiteboard and start whacking drawings and post-it notes and structures and all sorts of things into that context. We were able to draw boundaries and identify who's inside the boundary and who's outside the boundary. All of that sort of process really legitimized or enabled a whole broader range of stakeholders and people at every level in organizations to start participating in conversations about the system. And so I started being really negative about COVID and what it brought, but one of the benefits coming out of COVID is now people are really much more capable and enabled to participate in the sort of conversations you just suggested we all should, Ruth. So virtual environments can make it much, much easier.
Yeah, in actual fact, many of my students will know that I love Padlet, also Slido. Padlet and Slido are my two go-to softwares to use to engage people in conversations and do brainstorming and thinking about different perspectives. And I think we need to get rid of the idea that thinking isn't good. You know, sitting and reflecting and thinking about things and brainstorming together. There's obviously right ways to do it and bad ways to do it, but that is a really important part of our work because we need to sit sometimes and just talk about why these wicked problems are happening, whether it's internal within our organisation or whether it's external and the work that we're trying to do in the community. Okay, last question is from Rachel. Can you talk about how you've used systems thinking in advocacy? How have you used this work in advocacy? Or how do you think it should be done?
The advocacy in the context of the sort of not-for-profit organisations I've worked with who have advocacy for a particular theme or a particular health outcome as one of their primary purposes. I think what that requires is for those people who want to influence politicians and government officers in shifting policy from where it is now to where it's going to be in terms of the outcome, the content at the top of the iceberg. If I want to change the incidence of HIV from X to Y or hepatitis C from X to Y, what that requires is a whole lot of work in terms of process and structure within the community that disease is affecting in order to achieve that particular outcome. So enabling politicians and government officers to understand the interrelationships within that system that needs to change to achieve that different result or that different content is really important if you're representing that system, advocating for that system, and what government can do to invest in or restructure how it works to achieve that outcome. So very important.
And I've seen it really being used at the moment to advocate more for prevention strategies rather than crisis strategies. I mean, government in particular, but even philanthropy can often try to be funding solutions that are more at the crisis end, or, you know, and I think perhaps many of us believe that we need to be actually working in the prevention side a lot more and sort of working before problems happen sometimes. And this is a great way of being able to advocate for the strategy that you believe is going to get better outcomes for people.
Well, so, just picking up on what you just said, Ruth, if you look at the iceberg, that shift is a cultural shift away from crisis to prevention.
Yes.
And it's cultural shift at a whole lot of levels, including the people who are donating funds to achieve a particular outcome. A lot of people will donate funds for crisis intervention because they can see the problem, it's there, people are on the streets suffering. But it's harder to convince them to invest in a preventative program, which is going to prevent that from happening because they want to invest in the crisis. So that's a cultural perception thing that needs, and that's right at the bottom of the iceberg. And so you've got to go deep to be able to adjust and change that. So thanks for allowing me to share that.
All right. So wrapping up then, I want us to give you top tips, which are on the screen right now. And if anybody wants to contact Lewe, by the way, there's a QR code you can just scan and you can get through to Lewe. If none of your, you know, if you've still got some burning questions, he's open to answering some of your questions after the session. Lewe, you've got about 1 to 2 minutes to just take us through your top tips then about using systems thinking.
I'll think about those 3 nested levels of learning thinking: single loop, double loop, triple loop. The what, so what, now what? Same sort of concepts. Think about that when you're trying to understand which level you're trying to work out or change. Sequencing your questions is really important. I said work on the system, then go into the system, then back onto the system in terms of measuring, you know, if we change this, these are the sort of things we're going to track to see whether it's better than where we were now. Co-design using system architecture. The iceberg is a perfect template for you to go below the surface and understand what bits you might want to change or tweak to change the result from what it currently gets. And understanding that organizations are fractal is really important concept. And I'll just leave you with my favorite evaluation technique from a systems perspective is results-based accountability. I think it's a wonderful place to start. You might not finish there, but you want to start evaluating systems. Think about using results-based accountability. Mark Friedman, the guy who designed it, said systems thinkers see social structures and government bureaucracies as fractal entities. That means they're similar structures at progressively larger and also smaller levels of magnification. So think nesting, but the structures are similar at different scales. And there's Russian dolls is often the way, nested Russian dolls is the way we like to portray that metaphor. Yeah. So that's it. And that's you're off really, and running, your system's thinking.
I want you all put in a number 1 if you think you can now go back and start to go, I think I could be a systems thinker. I think I could think about some of this. All right, great. Look, everybody's going to go back and start thinking about how they're going to think from a systems perspective. The exciting news that I have to tell everybody is that I'm about to publish a report that was commissioned by Paul Ramsey Foundation over the last few months, which is why I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and learning about this. And I've put it together in a report, and we are going to publish that, and I'm going to send each one of you a copy, and it's got some really great case studies, but it takes you through all the jargon that we've been talking about this morning and explains some of those words and what this all means. And then I've got some really great questions that you can take to your team so that you can start to encourage your team to be better systems thinkers. And then I've got a whole heap of resources and reports and other things at the back of this report that will help you do a better, deeper dive into this topic. So look for your inbox from me. I will be sending you that link whenever I can get it out there to you, but I will send it to you personally. All right. Well, that hour has gone so quickly. I knew it would, Lewe, and I know that we've still got, this is such a big topic, but thank you so much for being able to share with us some of your thoughts and principles today and inspiring us, because this really is a fantastic way of thinking about things and evaluating. More tea and buns, anybody? We will be back here next month. I will send you the link to register if you're interested. We have got a great speaker who we're going to pick the brains of, all about being entrepreneurial. It's amazing to think about how important it is to not always be an entrepreneur, but to be an intrapreneur. And if you're not sure whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I want you to come along to Tea and Buns next month and learn about the power of being an entrepreneur. All right, so who's coming next month? I hope you'll all join us. Please bring your colleagues, and thank you so much. Lewe, there's lots of thank yous in the chats. Everybody's going to go off and make the world a better place now, and hopefully get really excited about systems thinking. Thank you. Leanne has just put the link in for to sign up for Tea and Buns next month. So you can go straight there now, but I'll also send the link out to everybody.